I wanted to talk to you a little bit about project management this week. As an engineer, a lot of times you'll be put in charge of projects as you go through your career, and you need to know, like, how do you keep track of your resources? How do you make sure your project is on task? How do you know that you're not going over budget? Things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of a definition of project management and the purpose for it. So if you think about managing a project, trying to achieve a goal, that you need to have a plan. That's what, as a planner, as an engineer, you need to make sure that you have a good plan set up so that you can make sure that you get to your goal in the end. And you need to look at organizing your team. You have a group of people that you're working with, and you want to make sure that they all know what they're doing, that they all have tasks to do, that people aren't sitting around, maybe people aren't overworked, and making sure that your resources are all there for them. And so you have a bunch of resources that you're going to have at your disposal for the project. You might need materials, you might need tools, you might need equipment. So you have to be able to make sure you have all that equipment and resources available when it's needed. So we're going to focus on the first two steps on making a plan and organizing your team and kind of monitoring the process. Exactly what resources you're going to need will depend pretty much on your project, so we won't discuss that. Further down the road, you can maybe look into some possibly some supply chain management courses that we offer at Barron. So when you have a good plan, we want to have our resources available in place so that we're not delaying our project at all. We're getting things done on time, that people aren't waiting around for the tools to be ready or for the parts to be available. So we want to make sure that that you have all the people, parts, and supplies ready to go when they're needed. So just thinking about, in general, an example of like building a house, for example, just a real simple breakdown of some steps. You could look at some steps here from putting on the roof and getting building permits, painting the walls. You can kind of organize these in different ways. There's probably a best order here, and if you look at the steps over here, probably there's some options here you can maybe choose to follow, but probably the best choice would be, if you look at, probably the first thing you should do is probably get a building permit. That'd probably be a good idea. So step 2 would probably be a good thing to start off with, and putting in a foundation would be a good next step to make sure that you have a good foundation for your building. And as you go through the rest of these steps, putting up the frame and the roof, putting electrical and plumbing, and then finishing the walls, and then painting the walls. Okay, so that would be a good order, a good proper sequence of events that would get the house built in time. So some of the things you might want to consider is, how long is it going to take to get these activities done as you go through the plan. You want to make sure that you have your resources available at the right time. So how long is each of those activities going to take? It'll take some experience to get to know that, but over time that's something that you gain, and maybe your other people that work on the project that have been doing it for a while have a good idea for that. What is going to happen in each of those activities? What type of tools are you going to need? What's the best sequence of doing that task? What are the things that have to be done before that task? You need to kind of keep track of all those things. Keeping track of the cost would be important to make sure that you're not going over budget. How many people are you going to have to use for each of those activities? How much resources are you going to have in people resources and supply resources? When you're ordering supplies, how far in advance do you need to order that to make sure that you're going to get it on time? And what type of tools are you going to need? What type of equipment are you going to need to do that, so you make sure that you have those available? Those are all related questions that would come up with any project, not just building a house. So if you put them in a nice sequence of events, you can say you have a certain number of people, certain people working on the project, and about an approximate number of time, how many weeks it would take to get that done. And then you could have a start date and end date assigned. So this would be a real basic plan for the steps it would take to get done. For different projects, it could be a matter of, instead of weeks, it could be minutes, or it could be days, or it could be months. It kind of depends on the project and what the time frame for the project is. So this is a real basic schedule for when things should be done. But for simple projects, these steps could be linear. and so you can kind of do them one after the other, and that you have something that needs to be done from the first step before you go on to the next step. So you have to make sure that those steps are done in sequence, in the proper order. And then, but if there's any delays that happen on any of those steps, it's going to delay the whole project getting done. So when you have a more complicated project, you can maybe divide it up a little differently, and think about, how could I put activities simultaneously so that things get done faster, so I can use my resources and get things done faster. So most of these things can be done simultaneously. You can put in the plumbing and electrical at the same time. You could put in windows and doors at the same time. Heating and plumbing you can do at the same time. You can put shingles up while you're putting windows in, but you really can't probably put the foundation and walls in. So as you're making a plan, you have to know, what things can be done simultaneously or concurrently. So that one wouldn't work very well. So for a larger project, you can probably use some management skills in order to kind of divide up these tasks and make a plan for how the project is going to go through, so that you can plan out, what sequence events you can go through, what type of tools you're going to need. We have our tasks scheduled, and we have our people assigned, and we have all the supplies they need that are ready to go. And then you're trying to monitor what's going on. You want to make sure that you're kind of have control over the steps that are occurring, and making sure that the tasks are occurring, and if something unanticipated happens, how do you make up for that? So as we go through some steps that we'll talk about in project planning, identifying those tasks and sequences and what resources you need would be the first step in the process, making sure you understand the whole process well. And then you can use what's called a work breakdown structure, and it's just kind of an organizational tool that you could use to organize all that information into something that's understandable and you could share with somebody else. And then you can develop a schedule to figure out when things should be done, and there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One is using a program evaluation and review technique, which is called a PERT chart or a network diagram, and it shows basically the steps that have to go along in the process of getting your overall project done. And a second one would be a Gantt chart, which is a basic schedule which shows what steps need to be done before which other steps and how long each step is going to take, and it's more of a timeline view of the overall project. So I remember when I worked at a company, we had a big, huge Gantt chart for our project, and as the equipment was being built, they were marking off, what's done, what's not done, and you had a date, say this is today, and you can see, are you on task for everything that's supposed to be done by today. So the Gantt chart is a pretty useful tool too. So we'll go on to look at some of these tools and how we can use them in project management.